And we are live. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another episode of A Bookish Moment. I am Sarah Burr.
And I am JC Kenny. Happy Baby Friday, folks. It's almost 5 o'clock, so it's a day after Wine Wednesday, but you get the drift. And I tell you what, today is your second day of the Hoosier Connection because it's so exciting. Tuesday, we had a Central Indiana author. Today, we have another Central Indiana author. So we got the Hoosier State representing. I'm going to stop babbling. Sarah, I think it's time to get bookish.
Let's get bookish, everybody. Yeah. Thank you so much to our viewers who are joining us live. It's always wonderful to have you here. And we are especially excited today to chat with Claire Isenthal about her new book, The Rising Order. Claire, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. This is my first YouTube live broadcast.
Well, we hope that we're not going to scare you away from it. we like to have fun here.
I've done some live radio, and that was unnerving because you can't be edited out. So
that is true.
Hopefully it prepared me.
Hopefully things will be smooth sailing, but we're really excited to get to know you and to dive in and talking about your new book. Before we do kind of get into the meat of things, do you mind just kind of introducing yourself to our audience members and telling us a little bit about your background?
Yes, of course. So hi, everyone. My name is Claire Isenthal. I do live in Central Indiana. We recently moved my whole family. My son was only 6 months old at the time, but during the pandemic, my husband and I moved our family back to Indiana. We had lived in Chicago for almost 10 years. That was where I worked in big tech during that time. So we relocated our family back to Indiana, and I recently left my corporate job this past summer to focus on promoting and marketing the book, and of course, also starting to write the second because it's going to be a series. I have 2 young children at home, so life is always crazy. But we really do love being back here. And this is my first novel. So it's been a really amazing journey. The book debuted in October. So it's still a noob. It's a noob.
The Rising Order is still a brand new book, baby.
It's still a brand new book, baby.
It is, yes. Yeah. And it's something for us. This is a treat for Sarah and I because, Claire, I'd like to ask you to tell everybody a little bit about the book because this is the first time we've had somebody who writes kind of the thriller dystopian kind of feel for your book. So tell us a little bit about The Rising Order.
Yes, of course. So the series is definitely an adult take on the lead up to a dystopian society and what would be like our present day. And so there are a lot of threats, which are very realistic, like cyber terrorism and whatnot. And that's what the book centers around. But essentially, a young woman is taken hostage by a domestic terrorist organization, and they use her to infiltrate her computing company that she works for to target Chicago's electrical grid. So that's the basis. And I've started to really realize as I tell readers about the book and the premise, how it sounds very military-like, but although it's a very action-packed story, it's very character-driven. So the focus is definitely very much on the characters. So it's a thriller, it's a suspense novel. There's a little sprinkling of romance in there too. So it's got a little bit of everything.
So basically, folks, I'm sorry, Sarah, I just have to say, if you're fans of Divergent, read this and you'll know how we got to Divergent. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah. Thank you, JC. Yes.
I would just love to know, Claire, so you mentioned that you recently have left your corporate life behind to focus on writing, and that speaks to my soul. How did the idea for this book come about, and how did you find, I guess, the time and the effort and the energy to write it while you were still working in your big tech position?
So that's a great question. I I think I always liked, so first of all, I started writing the book about 7 years ago. So it's really taken me about 7 years for me to bring this book to fruition in terms of like the publication process journey, finding an agent, how long that took. So I started writing this book before I did have children. And I have a lot of young mothers who do ask me that. And like, how do you do all of this? And I say, I didn't do it when I had kids. So I wrote this whole book before I had children. Now I was still revising it and editing it and getting it ready for publication when I did. And that almost killed me. So that on top of the fact that I did have a very demanding job, it just became too much. I worked for Google. I worked there for almost 9 years. I felt like I grew up there. The people were very near and dear to my heart. But I really did, during the time that I wrote the book, I had to make a lot of sacrifices and compromises. So that entailed like when I would get home from work, writing every evening. It would entail when my friends were going to bars in Chicago on the weekends, me not going. And so there was a lot of things that I did have to say no to in order to prioritize doing this. But I found that although I wasn't fulfilled in my corporate job, writing helped fulfill me for a long time. That kind of enabled me to continue to work throughout the 7 years for this to happen until it finally, like I said, having to, manage a family amidst all of it too, and how much work it is to promote a book. That finally is what was the straw that broke the camel's back, and I had to pick.
Well, we're very glad that you're able to take that step, because sometimes that it's a scary thing to kind of put all of your hopes into your dreams and go after them. So congratulations on being able to do that and being here and having your first book out in the world.
Thank you.
How did that feel? What was when you first found out that an agent wanted to represent you? What was that process and feeling like?
Oh, it was so exciting and exhilarating. It really is so hard and so challenging to find representation. But I think what I thought is that you get an agent, you're going to get a book deal. And nope, that doesn't happen. And so
nice thought.
Yeah, nice thought. If only it works that way. But I think that is what I now have. It's really important to celebrate those milestones because it doesn't happen often. And it's so hard to even get to the point where you can get an agent. And so it was very exciting at the time. It's now looking back, I'm like, oh my gosh, I was so naive because of all of the work that went into then, of course, going on submission and that journey. But I think it's really important. And what I've really learned is that celebrating the wins are just so huge because there aren't that many of them.
That's true.
I very much agree. It's definitely a roller coaster of emotions when you're going through the publishing process, for sure.
It is. And I think every stage of this journey I have felt is the hardest part. So when you're writing the book, you're like, this is the hardest part. When you're editing the book, you're like, this is the hardest part. Publication, it's the same way. And now that I'm actually published and trying to sell the book, I'm like, this is the hardest part, And I think that's because, and I think you both could attest to this, that selling books is a grind and it doesn't just sell itself. No, you have to really hustle. And so, and a lot of that is on you and on your responsibility. Your publisher, of course, helps in certain areas, but there's a lot of self-promotion that has to go into it, especially now. And so that's been a lot of work.
I think that's the biggest, that for me, that was the biggest shock of the whole process. I didn't expect there to be so much work after the book was done. And now I'm writing the book is the easiest part for me. That's no brainer.
I agree.
The easiest part and everything that comes after is where the real work begins.
It's a very humbling experience. I was on an Instagram live last night with another podcast, and we were really talking about how it's very humbling because you're constantly asking things of people when you're in this position, asking people to read it, asking people to review it, asking people to buy it. And so it's all part of this journey of building a readership and a following and whatnot.
And that's why I think deep down, all writers, even if they don't admit it, are way deep down, and you might have to dig 1.5 miles to get to it. But we're all optimists in the end because there's I have something I want to share, and people somewhere will want to read it.
I think you're so right. I've never heard that before, JC, but you're exactly right. I think that's so true. I'm going to use that.
I think
There you go.
I
Cool.
needed to hear that. I needed to hear that today because it's like the process, sometimes you're riding high up here and then other times it's like, oh gosh, like how am I going to dig myself out of this hole that I have found myself in?
Exactly. And going back to kind of your first question, Sarah, that it was really scary to quit my very stable, cushy job. And I'm feeling the effects of not having a steady paycheck anymore. And I did, I anticipated that. I knew that it wasn't like this was a split decision. I had obviously been something that I had been kind of preparing for a long time, but like, in order to make a living off of books, you have to sell a lot of books.
Mhm.
And I don't think it's very hard prior to debuting to conceptualize what those numbers are and what they look like. And, you can have a very supportive network, but like you tap out of your network really quickly. And so finding ways to branch out outside of that is really critical to trying to find success and new people to read the book. So that's been a journey. Like I have learned so much these past 2 months, just, on things that I would have done differently, but how can you when you just don't know? And I'm trying to figure out a way that I can kind of package that up and share it with other debut authors. Because
that's wonderful. That's
Yeah.
such a good, there are so many lessons that we learn, and being able to share and give that advice, I think is such a huge, and it's such a reason why like being a part of this community is so wonderful and helpful, because we're all there to support each other and realize that even though the act of writing is very solitary, that like we're not alone in this. Like everybody's going through the same storm together.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to take a second to say hi to everybody who's kind of watching us live here. Not kind of, is watching us live right now. We got DHB, Farmhouse Reader, Annette. Thank you all for being here live. We appreciate it. And Claire, Farmhouse Reader has a question for you.
Oh, yes.
Did the idea for your book come from working at Google?
A lot of it is very much inspired by my time at Google. Yes, that's a great question. And the fictional company in the book is called Magnetic, and it is based on the Google Chicago office.
Oh, okay.
Yes. And for my friends at Google, there's a lot of Easter eggs in the book. The office is based on the Chicago office there. There's some names that are kind of sprinkled in of people who I've worked with. So that's really fun, but it's very much inspired by how I think if big tech was to kind of take a little bit of like a darker direction. So not Google in that vein, but there's a lot of inspiration there. Yeah.
Well, cool.
Yeah.
Well, kind of along that line, I kind of want to circle back because unfortunately we're almost halfway through the show.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Well, Claire, we warned you about that.
I know you did. You did.
You mentioned earlier that this is an action-packed thriller. A lot going on, but really at its core, it really is a character-based story.
Yeah.
We've got two main characters. We've got Flynn, who is our protagonist, and we've got Wolf, who is our antagonist. Can you introduce them to us, please?
Yes. So Flynn is a woman she's about 27, and she's very disenfranchised with her job and working for this company that she always, aspired to work for. And she's kind of realized, oh, this isn't it. And I think there's a lot of myself and Flynn, especially in the sense of how I think when you're in your late 20s, you're expected, or you kind of think you'll have so much of life figured out, and you realize that's almost like when life smacks you in the face, like there's so much about life you really don't know, and you realize that life actually starts to get really scary around this time. There's different relationships that you're forming and developing. Your career really you're kind of dabbling in. A lot of times you actually kind of want to pivot and do something else. So there's just so much going on at that stage of our lives. And I don't think that there's as many characters depicted around that age in fiction. And then on the other side, you have Wolf, who is a ostracized young man who is very kind of just hates society, and he was seduced into this extremist organization at a young age and has kind of been brainwashed and conditioned and is very much a part of that organization now. And so we kind of see his evolution as a character too from that journey. And he is very angry with the world. I don't know if did that summerize them well
I
enough?
think angry with the world puts it mildly, shall we say.
Yeah, okay. I was going to say maybe that's a little, yes. He's very vicious and ruthless, and he is a trained killer. So it's a dark book. I didn't realize how dark it was until how many people have told me it's dark.
When you were writing it, Claire, did you, and actually I'm kind of answering my own question because you just said that like you didn't realize, but when you were writing it, like, did you feel that darkness? Did it like come from you from the page, or like, because I've always thought about writing a suspense thriller, and I've been told that it's like, well, be prepared to be like emotionally, like the turmoil to get you down emotionally. It's like, oh my gosh, like I already have like way too many things that are trying to tear me down. Like I don't need to add like my own writing to the mix. So I'm curious, like, was your emotional state affected by the experiences that your characters were having?
That's a great question. And I would say, no, like my personal emotional state was not affected by my characters. But I think that there was a lot of processing that I was doing while I was writing the book, because I think it is a reflection of very real threats and very timely themes that's happening in our world today. And that was me processing it. And the reason why I wrote the book was because of how mass shootings have just blown up throughout our country and almost become a norm. And I think in a sense, we've become very desensitized to it. And so I think storytelling is a way to kind of break through that, the noise on the news that we're constantly being bombarded with, because it allows you to feel a little bit something at a deeper level, and it allows you to better understand people's experiences. And the whole motive behind writing Wolf was what drives a person to commit these types of violence. And I did. I interviewed an ex-neo-Nazi skinhead who has, of course, since left the organization, in order to really validate and make sure that I was writing an authentic character with him, because extremism is a huge national security threat in our country. And I think it's probably one of the biggest.
How did you set that up? Like, how did you have like that conversation happen?
He's actually quite a big deal now. He has two, his name is Christian Piccolini, and he's fantastic. He formed a nonprofit organization that's focused on extracting extremists from their organizations and reassimilating them back into society. And it's called Life After Hate. And he's not as involved in that nonprofit anymore, but he's been featured on, had TED Talks. He's been featured on 60 Minutes. He has 2 books of his own. And his wife worked at Google with me, and he came and did a talk at Google. And so I was like, I have to meet him because I read his book. And so I interviewed him after his talk at Google, and it was, I'll never forget it to this day.
Were you already writing The Rising Order at that point, or was it something that was still like simmering?
I was, and I'd already pretty much finished it. So it was more so me kind of like validating Wolf's character and experiences and ensuring that like this is something that would actually happen and that was realistic. And one of the biggest takeaways that was important was, when individuals join these extremist groups, they don't really care what the mission is. They don't care what the organization does. They just care that they experience a sense of belonging and ultimately a sense of power from being a part of these groups. And that's important because it just goes to show that like, it doesn't really matter what they're doing or why. They just feel a sense of what they've been missing for a lot of their lives in other areas of their lives, if that makes sense.
Well, it does to me, because one of the things that I don't want to be too spoilerish here, but in reading the book for so long, you wait until a pretty far road down before we finally find out kind of what Wolf's group is wanting to accomplish.
Yeah.
Then even then, it's kind of instead of saying, we want to, put enough people into the Senate that we have a majority. We have 60 senators, and we're going to be able to kind of steer the government this way. They're like all these kind of big, more nebulous things.
Yeah.
And I just thought that was really interesting, the way, to your point, and again, I'm rambling, so I apologize.
No,
But
no.
the way, it's all really, about, okay, well, we have this thing we want to do, but it's all about finding these disenfranchised young people to be part of something bigger.
Exactly. And I'm so glad you picked up on that, JC, because there are certain things that were very intentional about that vagueness, because so much of this book, unfortunately, was setting the stage, and a lot more is revealed in the second book about the organization, about why the city of Chicago they're targeting. So it sets the stage for who the organization is and what their goals are, but you find a lot more about the why behind it in the second book. So it's hard writing a series because a lot of people want instant gratification, but as you both know, there's arcs that are very important to the story and to the characters that really can't be revealed in just one book.
Did you, when you were kind of brainstorming everything, did you know that it was always going to be a series and that you would have this large arc going through, or was it something that as you were working on it, you realized like, oh wow, there's like so much more here I can explore and build up and kind of, I guess, divvy up the action from there?
I always knew it was going to be a series, but there was a lot that I didn't know until I was really in it writing it. So a lot of the second book didn't come to me until I was writing the first. And as I was writing the first, a lot of the second became very clear to me. And now that I'm writing the second, there's a lot I don't know about the third still. I have ideas. I have a lot of ideas, but there's a lot of unknowns still. And JC, it wasn't until we were at the conference where we met that I always felt very self-conscious admitting that I didn't know what was going to happen in the series. And then I feel like at the conference, we heard from so many authors who said the same thing, is that like they didn't know what was going to happen in their stories and in their writing. And it made me feel very reassured for one of the first times.
Yeah. And Sarah and I have talked about this, and it blows my mind. I think, Sarah, it blows your mind too. You get these, so many of our mystery author friends, our whodunit friends say, yeah, I start writing and I just kind of go and I have no idea who the killer is. And it's like, how do you do that?
That I don't know how you do.
Amazing job.
I feel like I have, so one of the series that I write, I'm preparing to write the last book in the series. And I know how I know the last line and how I want it to end. But I really don't know, I'm still trying to figure out how do I get my characters to this spot in the best, most satisfying way possible. And it's like the longest that I've ever taken to figure out a book and plot and even I'm having trouble figuring out who is going to be killed, who makes sense to die in this one. And so it's I think it's definitely, especially for series writing, that you can get to a point where it's I know the vague picture, but finding those details can be really scary.
Yes. But I will say, Sarah, as a word of encouragement, hopefully, is that I think the ending is the most important part. And a lot of times people can't get there, and they can't get there in a satisfactory way. And I don't remember I think it was another podcast that I did where the host was telling me there was another author who went back and had to rewrite it and republish it because people were so angry about it. And so I think that if you know the ending, you really can get there. You just have to trust in yourself and in the characters. And that's kind of how this book started. I knew the final scene and I didn't really know. I kind of built the story around that scene. But that was when people asked me about how I started, that's one of the most vivid moments that I have, was that end scene that I knew, and I didn't know much else beyond that.
And I want to let our viewers know also, just even though we're talking quite a bit about series, that book one has a satisfying ending for this particular story. And so it reminds me to a certain degree of kind of the Harry Potter novels, in that, we had 7 books, that big arc. And Claire, obviously, I don't know how many you're planning on writing with this, but at the end of book one, it definitely has a specific conclusion. So don't feel like Claire's just going to get you there and just say, okay, to be continued.
Bye.
Yeah, thank you so much. And that's true. And I agree with you. And I was very much influenced by the Harry Potter novels I grew up on. Some I read 11 times. So yes, it does, hopefully, but there's a lot more that's left, kind of oh, there's more coming.
Yeah. Yeah.
Have you experienced,
I'm,
Claire? Oh, sorry, JC. I'm just
no, go
curious
ahead.
about the for having, now that you're writing your second book, is there anything that's like very, very different from how you're approaching it based on the first time that you sat down to write a novel?
I am a much better writer now. And that's because of all of of the past 7 years, all of the work that I've done, all of the rewrites, the editors I've worked with, the critique group that I work with. And so I think that there's a lot that's easier in that sense, is that I'm better at the craft. And that also I know the characters very intimately. And I feel like another reason why I can't work on another project at this time is because their stories are still very much burning in me. And so I feel very compelled to kind of finish the story. So I feel like in that sense, it's much easier because there were so many unknowns when I was writing it the first time. And it was just, the first draft was so bad.
That's okay. That's
yeah.
They,
Like,
they
oh,
all
cringe.
are.
I know.
They all
I know.
are.
You just got to keep working at it, don't you?
You do. And where our time is almost short, but I've got to ask
No.
one more question,
Yeah.
is in kind of going to themes.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I really loved was the theme that we really do as human beings need to form and hold on to connections to and with others really is something very strong
Yeah.
in this book.
Mhm.
And it really hit me very, very hard. And I think partly because as authors, we tend to live or work kind of in a solitary environment.
Mhm.
So I kind of like in a couple of minutes, if you can kind of talk about, that theme of how, yes, we are stronger together.
Mhm. Oh, that's such a good kind of question and topic. I think that's one of the and I don't think I know, and I know it's being widely talked about, especially after the pandemic. But one of the biggest is it epidemic is like loneliness, and in this really loss of connection that I think so many people are, and so many young people are really experiencing. And I'm sure there's a lot of things. I know there's a lot of things that are contributing to that, but I think one of my favorite conversations between Wolf and Flynn was when Wolf was kind of talking about, like I grew up alone, and like what's worse than that? Like what is worse than that? And the opportunities that he never had because of that, and the privileges that he never experienced because of that. And so a lot of it was like a big reckoning of my own privilege that I've grown up with, my own education, my own support systems that have given me kind of the lottery of life, regardless of which path that I end up taking. And so many people aren't that fortunate and lucky. And I think that's another reason why extremism is also on the rise, and why violence is starting to occur in so many different facets of our lives. And so that is why this theme is so timely. I think it's why it's so important. It's why I feel so passionately about this story. Is because it goes to show, and this was another thing that was validated by Christian Piccolini in my conversations with him, is that like one intimate connection's all you need to really change somebody. And that might seem cliche or grand, but I don't think it is. And that's another reason why, as we see Flynn and Wolf's relationships start to intersect more and unfold, it's why it's very important. And it's very important moving into the next installment. So I try to be succinct as possible, because I know we have a minute left.
I'm feeling the comment that you made about, through your writing, you realize like how lucky you were, and how, and I mean, that's really gratifying as I think a human being, to like have that moment and have that clarity, to be able to say like, you know what, I've won the lottery in life, and helping to shine a light on the reasons why other people are feeling as though they haven't. So I think that's really special.
Yes. And the last thing I'll say is, so much of the Reds organization, which is this terrorist group, is about eradicating any sort of feeling or any past sense of identity, and severing that from somebody. And I do think that's a very unnatural thing to happen. And when it does happen, and when a person has nothing to lose, that's when people really do become very deadly. And so it also explores that too, and what it's like to fully like eradicate that part of somebody's identity.
Well, I think you've had our viewers hooked, and
I hope.
like The Rising Order is out now. Claire, it's been absolutely wonderful chatting with you
it's
today.
been
The
such a
time flew. I told
pleasure.
you it was
I
going to
know
fly by.
you did. It's because you've been such great hosts. Thank you.
Tell us where, tell our viewers where they can connect with you, find you, keep in touch with you.
Yes, please follow me on social media. I'm on Instagram at Claire Isenthal. I'm on TikTok. My TikTok is very lacking. I'm trying. I'm on Facebook. Please reach out at any time. I love, like my favorite part of this process is hearing from readers. And you can find my website at claireisenthal.com. I have events that are coming up posted there. I have, reviews and other interviews you can watch. So I try to update it as much as possible. It's hard.
Awesome.
Yes.
Wonderful. Well, again, it was absolutely
Thank
fabulous
you.
having you here and chatting. And we are to our
So
viewers
grateful.
who joined us live. Thank you very much for being here, you guys. As
Thanks,
always,
everyone.
it's wonderful to be
Thank
bookish with
you.
you. We are going to be back next week for our final show of 2023. We're going to be doing a bookish hour with Linda Norlander. She'll be joining us Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So again, Claire, thank you for being here with us. And
Thank you.
everyone else, stay bookish. Have a good afternoon, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.